Hi everybody. So great to have the opportunity to speak to you today about Nevada copper and what we're trying to build in Nevada. So let me just start off with a kind of a high-level overview of the company and the asset base. So really we've got in Pumpkin Hollow, we have a truly strategic asset in that it's fully permitted and shovel-ready in Yankton, Nevada, which is pretty rare when you look at where as you've heard a lot today and yesterday, where the copper market is. Having something that's ready to go as we enter what is generally becoming accepted as a period of pretty substantial deficits is quite unique. The scale there with 5 billion pounds of copper in reserve with a lot of potential to grow that. And given the sunk capital and time in advancing the underground mine, that lead time to production is very short, so we'll be one of the first, certainly the first new copper producers in North America and likely in the world. Obviously sits in Nevada, as Tom said, world-class jurisdiction and stark contrast to trying to look for copper in Congo and some of the jurisdictions we see. You've got part of the new board there sitting in front of you. We've really built a completely new and deeply experienced execution-focused team to take that asset base into production and then grow it out with the open pit behind the underground mine. And again, as I think you've all probably spoken about in the last couple of days, we see a really interesting inflection point in where the copper market is and positioned to ramp up right into the guts of those deficits. So that all leads into really a three-tier strategy for the company. Number one, become the next copper producer in North America, leverage $220 million of sunk capital. It's about where the market cap is today. Use that short lead time to get in production, generating cash, not consuming cash. From that, use those cash flows to unlock the potential of the open pit. And what you'll see as we go through, that open pit has been re-engineered as well with the same philosophy that was applied to the underground, to focus on IRR and cash generation versus scale for the sake of scale. So then from the underground and open pit behind it, really holistically build out and realize the full potential of the asset base and the district we sit in, which you'll see is a really well-endowed copper district in Nevada. And use that asset base and the region to selectively grow and become the next mid-tier copper company. I won't spend a lot of time talking about copper market fundamentals. I'm sure I'll repeat what's already been said a few times, but what I'll put out is what's really relevant to what we're trying to build here. The deficits that probably don't show up with that color scheme, you've all seen that chart. We're right at that inflection point. You've seen Chilean copper grades decline in particular, and political risk events create a number of, particularly last year we saw 1 million tons lost on a 23 million ton market to unplanned disruptions. And looking into this year, things don't look a hell of a lot better. That I think's all been said before. I think strong demand outlook is also well known. What I'll actually pick out here is when you look at what little growth you do have in an already structurally short market, you've got growth coming from all the wrong jurisdictions. If you're going out spending capital to bring on new supply, and you've actually had a decline in output of North America where you'd really like to see copper being produced. Just briefly, I think this chart from Arubis tells that whole picture perfectly. You see the run up in prices in the last cycle and the supply response. What you see if you look at the last 40 years of the copper market is when you hit incentive pricing, due to the lag time to bring on meaningful copper supply, you get prolonged copper cycles that take a long time to respond to increases in pricing. You look at BHP's numbers on what's required to meet copper deficits. They're looking at $100 billion of capital, greenfield capital to get spent over the next 10 years. Bear in mind you have to spend another $10 billion of capital to run as hard as you can just to stand still in terms of, say, sustaining capex. So you actually need to spend the equivalent of 2012 and 2013's total copper capex every year for the next 10 years to meet your demand projections, which are pretty tall order given an increasingly risky supply base and new projects that are in hard jurisdictions to make investment decisions on. So all of that has led us to the conclusion that what the copper market really needs for a sustainable future is a renaissance of North American copper production. So that's great, but then you look at what can you build? You have a structural issue in the US in particular where your average time to bring on a new mine is 7 to 10 years from a permitting perspective. And on the top left here, you've got, that's the universe of pre-production copper projects. I'll talk about how we got to a permitted status, but everything else, Excelsior have done well. They've just this week received a permit for their in-situ leach project, but everything else here, you're looking, many years away to actually convert permits here, particularly when you're following a federal permitting process. So really you've got, again, a strategic asset that if you want to build a project in a good jurisdiction, there's only one that from a permitting perspective, you could even move on today. So you need a team to execute on a project if you're going to build. A lot of words up there, but I'll just pick out for you some of the highlights of the team that we've pulled together to really execute on this. Tom, you've already heard from, is a lead independent director. Ernie Nutter was the head of research for Capital Group, one of the largest asset managers in the world. Lucio Genovese is the head of copper at Glencore. Mike Brown was the COO of De Beers. That's allowed us to attract top quality management. This new CEO who couldn't be here today, Matt, because he's busy building a mine. Matt Gill was the president and CEO of Palabora, which many of you know. Turned that operation around to one of the largest, most successful underground copper mines in the world. Moved from there to be COO of Oyu Tolgoi, responsible for the construction and ramp up of the open pit and the development of the underground, and joined us following a number of years with Barrick, first turning around the Cortez district and then working across multiple of their assets as chief technical officer. So really the skill set to execute on mine construction and development of a pipeline. So just to talk about the asset base a bit more now, what you have here is the overview of the concessions. We talked about how the permitted status of this mine being permitted on both, of this project being permitted on both an underground and an open pit mine is really a strategic differentiator. The way that was achieved is starting from the original land position you have there in red, through a land swap whereby the city of Yerington actually purchased the land you see there from the federal government and then swapped it with the company. We're able to consolidate 27 square miles of Yerington, Nevada ground around our project site, which has given us access to all the infrastructure, high tension power. If you look at Nevada, you've got a surplus of power, largely from natural gas and renewables. We've seen our power costs go down to 5.6 cents a kilowatt hour this year. Rail to nearby to site, water allocations from the municipal government, the municipality. A town nearby, we're in an hour and a half drive from Reno. It allows us to attract real talent in the terms of the labor pool without having to pay the kinds of salaries you need to have someone sit in a shipping container in the Congo. You can commute here from Reno. So this is an expanded land package, allows us to explore a number of areas that haven't been worked on previously and gives us everything we need to bring both mines into production. So let's talk about the underground mine first. The strategy was to focus there. You've got, again, $220 million of sunk capital. More important to me than the dollars is the 18 months lead time it took to put a 2,000-foot production shaft in place. And really the de-risking event, as you all know, underground mines of this kind, the biggest de-risking step is to get to depth and get into the ore body. So that's all there and in place. This is actually sized for 7,000 tons. The philosophy that we've applied to bringing this mine back into construction and quickly into operation was to shrink down the initial production scale from 6,500 to 5,000 tons per day. That's allowed us to lift the cut-off grade, bring down the operating costs, bring down the remaining capital cost, and altogether de-risk the execution plan. Another part of the de-risking steps taken, cementation, one of the leading underground mining contractors, were brought back to site. They completed the shaft. They're underground today, finalising the shaft for operation and for the ramp-up of development mining from the underground. We went into an EPC with Sedgman on a turnkey basis to deliver the surface infrastructure, remaining surface infrastructure and processing plant. So you'll see of $180 million of remaining capital spend to get to production, about 120 of that sits under a turnkey EPC arrangement. Just briefly, in terms of the underground study that was released late last year, and some of the changes in philosophy I just talked about, what we have is 108 million of remaining capital. As I said, that's a bog standard process plant under an EPC arrangement, and the ramp up of underground mining. You've got an initial 14-year mine life. Bear in mind that's 24 million tons of reserve, and you'll see in a moment we have a 75 million ton MI&I resource with a fair bit of work to be done around infill drilling to expand out that mine life. Higher grade, operating cost target around the midpoint of the cost curve, and again, an altogether more profitable and de-risked project that will produce around 27,000 tons of copper from the end of next year, which at today's prices is worth around $70 to $80 million of free cash flow. Just to tell you briefly what's not in a study, all that work was done at a 35% tax rate. We now sit at 21% tax in Nevada. We assume that the majority of our product is shipped to China for the purposes of the study. What we have the benefit of being able to do here is really build a integrated domestic value chain. You have smelting capacity in Utah and Arizona that is running short of feed. So you've got natural homes for our product locally, which has a major freight differential. And then in terms of mine life and production capacity, see if the laser, oh, there you go. The green and red here is measured and indicated that underpins the 24 million ton reserve. All of the blue is comparable grade and quality material. Just given the practicalities of drilling from surface, that's an inferred category, and as we're now, this is the infrastructure that's in place. As we're now at depth, we'll be fan drilling and work on converting inferred into M&I classification. So you'll see that mine life grow quite rapidly. So that's the underground mine in production, in commissioning, but towards the end of next year. First full year production, 2020, generating cash flow and one of the next producing copper mines. So we leverage from that into a much larger scale open pit mine. And what I'll take you through is how the open pit has been re-engineered using that same margin over tons or IRR-focused philosophy that we applied to the underground mine. So the original feasibility study that some of you may know from the open pit from earlier years was really focused on scale. So the mandate then had been, with an old management team, the mandate had been build something big and focus on tons. The approach that the team that's developing the underground has taken to the open pit is to focus first on grade. So the open pit is actually two pits, the north and the south. This yellow area here is the north pit, which is about 40% higher grade reserve than the south pit. So naturally focusing here first for the bulk of the initial mining. There's been a great deal of additional geotechnical work done in the years since the initial feasibility study, which allows you to design a far tighter, more economic, lower strip pit shape, which then allows you to rather than go for 70,000 tons per day, which is the original production capacity, start with 35 to 40,000 ton per day production rate, a half-size mill, focused on a high-grade, tighter mining shell. That gets you to a project now, and we released we released an update a few weeks ago that explains that the study will be coming during the summer from Golders. It gets you to a project that's about half of the initial capital, so closer to 500 million than a billion. That gets you to a still large-scale, 100,000 ton potential project focused on the north, with the ability to expand later on into the south. Nothing gets sterilized. So that's purely, as we did with the underground, that's reconfiguring existing feasibility work to focus on value. The other thing I'll wrap up quickly. The other thing I'll just pull out here is the work that's been done on the northern extension. Because of the constrained land position, you saw this early on, this is the original land position. The original feasibility work had to treat 20% of the volume of the North Pit as waste. We now have consolidated that land position and have spent the last few months drilling out this northern extension. We've released a number of results and a visible interpretation in others. That's allowed us to expand the ore body to the north and to the west. You'll see drill results coming out during the summer as we convert more of these assays. The numbers I just gave on the open pit, as it's been re-engineered, still don't include the benefit of potentially fairly significant conversion of waste tons that are just assumed to be stripping into actual ore tons. Just to give you a view of that in section. There you go. This is a section through the North Pit. This was the first hole drilled to the north step out. Gave us 40 meters at 2%. Bear in mind, we'll be mining grades of 0.55 to 6% here, and so we're seeing a lot of potential to convert this assumed huge amount of waste into ore. So that will come to you over the summer and result in a new resource statement at the end of the summer, and ultimately an updated feasibility for an open pit that can be quickly brought into production using sensible amounts of leverage and cash flow generated from the underground, i.e. without the need for huge slugs of equity to go out and be looked for in the future. The final point I'll make is to talk about the district very quickly. This is the land position we've consolidated here, 27 square miles. This whole image is about 100 square miles. It was an old mining district. The Yerington pit, mined by Anaconda from the 50s to the 70s, was what this town was based around. You have a number of other deposits. This is 5 miles across the highway. That give us about 35 billion pounds of copper already defined just in this small district. And what we see is a huge amount of potential within our property as well. First of all, we're building out under our permits the milling infrastructure, which will naturally, there's not a need for 10 mills in this small area. We have access now to a number of high potential targets within our grounds, and we're developing mines focused on large-scale, high-intensity skarn deposits, which generally would be associated somewhere with porphyry potential. So I'll stop there and let everyone carry on. Thank you.
Thank you.